Tea was once a luxury liner, gliding across the Mediterranean with elegance. Now, it is nothing more than a rotting corpse, half buried in the sea. But what if I told you, this ship is not just a wreck? What if I told you, it still breathes, still moves, and still watches those who dare to come close? The Mediterranean sky is not an ordinary sunken vessel, it's a graveyard of unanswered questions. And tonight, we're diving deep into its haunting mysteries. The Mediterranean sky was once a symbol of grandeur. Built in 1953, it sailed for decades, carrying thousands of passengers. But in the late 1990s, financial troubles forced it into abandonment. The ship was towed to shallow waters near Greece, where it capsized and was left to rot. For years, it lay forgotten, until divers, locals, and fishermen began reporting strange occurrences. Shadows moving on deck. Faint whispers coming from within the wreck. And then, the most chilling discovery of all, a distress signal, still being transmitted years after the ship had sunk. But who was sending it? Curiosity turned into obsession. A group of divers decided to explore the Mediterranean sky, hoping to uncover its secrets. As they approached, an eerie silence surrounded the ship. No birds, no waves, just a heavy, unnatural stillness. The first diver entered the ship's open deck. The rusted metal groaned under his weight. Inside, the hallways were flooded, dark, and lifeless. But as he swam deeper, something changed. A chair moved on its own. His flashlight flickered. Then, he heard it, a faint whisper. He turned sharply. No one was there. The diver steadied his breathing. Maybe it was just the current. Maybe the ship was playing tricks on him. But then, he heard it again. Footsteps. Inside a sunken ship. Impossible. Yet, they echoed through the waterlogged corridors, distant but distinct. He turned a corner and froze. A door was open. Just seconds ago, it was closed. His hands shook as he shined his flashlight inside. The room was filled with decayed furniture and floating debris. But one thing stood out, a mirror, cracked and covered in algae. And in it, for just a moment, he saw something standing behind him. When he turned, nothing was there. They had come as a team of 4. But now, one was missing. The remaining divers scanned their surroundings, panic setting in. He was just behind them, now he was gone. No bubbles. No sound. Just gone. They retraced their path, calling out through their radios. Nothing. Then, a soft static crackled through their earpieces. A faint voice, distorted, almost robotic. "Help me." But the missing diver's communicator was off. The signal wasn't coming from him. It was coming from inside the ship. The divers followed the eerie transmission, their hearts pounding. It led them to a sealed cabin door, one that should have been impossible to open after decades underwater. Yet, the handle was wet, as if someone had touched it recently. They hesitated. Then, one of them turned the handle. The door groaned as it opened slightly. Cold, murky water flowed out. Inside, the room was untouched by time, chairs still upright, an old clock frozen at 3:17 a.m. But then, something caught their eye. A nameplate. It wasn't rusted like the others. It was clean, as if someone had wiped it just minutes ago. Inside the cabin, they found a desk with a leather-bound journal, covered in mold. Flipping through the pages, they found its last entry, dated the very night the ship was abandoned. It read, "We are not alone. The ship is watching. We should have never left port." Before they could read more, the pages ripped themselves free, floating into the water as if something had snatched them away. Suddenly, their flashlights flickered. The door slammed shut behind them. And then, a voice. "You should leave." They forced the door open and swam back into the corridor. But something had changed. The walls weren't rusted anymore. The ship looked new, as if they had traveled back in time. A chandelier swung gently, despite the still water. And then, they heard it, a distant melody. It sounded like an old record player. They turned a corner and saw something impossible. The hallway wasn't abandoned anymore. Figures in formal 1970s attire stood around, frozen mid-step, their faces blurred and featureless. One figure turned its head. And then, the others did too. The divers tried to escape, but the hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly. The figures moved now, their heads tilting in unnatural angles. Then, a door at the far end swung open on its own. Inside was the captain's quarters, untouched by time. A chair sat facing the wall, a tattered captain's hat resting on the desk. Suddenly, the chair creaked and slowly spun around. Sitting there was a figure, dressed in a captain's uniform. His eyes were hollow. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, in a voice that didn't belong to him, he finally whispered, "You were never meant to be here." The divers sprinted for the exit, but the ship was changing. The rust returned. The walls twisted. Their own reflections in the windows were not their own. One of them reached for a railing, and their hand passed right through it. Reality was breaking down. Then, the ship lurched, throwing them off balance. A deep groan echoed through the corridors, like the ship itself was alive. And then, in the static of their radios, a woman's voice whispered, "Go before it takes you too." One of the divers collapsed. His oxygen tank was full, but he was gasping like he couldn't breathe. The others tried to pull him up, but something held him down. His legs were sinking into the floor. A handprint appeared on his helmet. Then another. Then dozens. Pale, ghostly hands pulling him down into the ship. The others screamed, grabbing him, pulling with all their strength. The ship trembled. The walls cracked. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The diver was free. And the ship was silent again. Every instinct in their bodies screamed run. But where? The ship was shifting. The corridors that led them in now twisted in ways that defied logic. It was as if the Mediterranean sky was alive, refusing to release them. Their lights flickered, the beams warping as they tried to navigate through the impossible maze. Their own shadows moved in the opposite direction, as if something else was casting them. And then, there it was, the exit hatch, their only way out. But something stood in front of it. A figure. Tall. Still. Waiting. It had no face, no features, just an unsettling silhouette against the deep abyss. It raised its arms slowly, not in warning, but in welcome. One of the divers, overcome by sheer desperation, reached out. As his fingers brushed the darkness, the figure shattered into a cloud of black mist, vanishing into the void. But even in its absence, something felt terribly wrong. They burst through the surface, gasping for air, the ocean stretching endlessly around them. The sky was clear, the waves calm, as if nothing had happened. But they all felt it. A deep, unshakable wrongness. They turned back, expecting to see the massive, decaying wreck rising from below. But the Mediterranean sky was gone. No structure, no rusted beams, no signs that the ship had ever been there. The ocean floor, just moments ago a maze of corroded metal and collapsed passageways, was now an empty seabed, undisturbed. It was as if the ship had been a mere illusion, a ghost of the past that had swallowed them for a time and then decided to let them go. Or worse, it had simply erased itself from existence. Their radios crackled. The familiar static returned. And then, one final whisper came through. "You were never here." The divers swam toward their boat, exhausted but relieved. As they climbed aboard, the salty breeze felt too real, almost as if the nightmare below had never happened. But then, small inconsistencies started to surface. One of them checked his dive computer. It still read the exact time they had entered the water. Another diver reached for his logbook. It was filled with entries he never wrote. But the most disturbing thing, their radio, completely dead, yet they could still hear the whispering. They looked at each other, their faces pale, realizing the truth. Whatever happened down there had followed them up. Back on land, they tried to forget. They told themselves it was just nitrogen narcosis, just their minds playing tricks. But their footage told a different story. As they replayed their helmet cam recordings, the first few minutes were normal. The wreck was as they remembered, dark, eerie, rusted. But then, frames started missing. Strange static glitched across the screen. And then, for a brief moment, a face appeared. Not any of theirs. A face that shouldn't exist. Then, something worse. One of the divers wasn't in the footage. He had been there the whole time. He had spoken, moved, touched things. But in the video, it was like he had never existed. And in the very last frame, the ship was still there, sitting in the depths, as if waiting for their return. They never spoke about it again. Not fully. Some of them moved away, others stopped diving entirely. But the worst part, they kept seeing it. The Mediterranean sky. In their dreams. In reflections. One diver swore he saw it on a sonar scan, appearing for only a second before disappearing. Another received a message from an unknown number, a grainy image of the ship, its name perfectly visible, as if it had never sunk at all. And then, one day, one of them vanished. No warnings. No signs. Just gone. His house left undisturbed. His dive gear still packed. The last message he ever sent? Just 3 words. It's still there. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe my channel.